We begin tonight's cast near Houston, where a highway maintenance worker has made a grisly discovery. This morning, he found a man's body. Shortly before noon, RCMP officers were called to Highway 16 to a brake check area between Burns Lake and Houston, 10 kilometers east of Topley. They say the body was found in a ditch. Police had the highway down to single-lane alternating traffic while conducting their investigation. The man's identity is not being released at this time, nor is the cause of death.
Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Deep in Bigfoot territory, episode 14, The Highway of Tears. This is a Squatch Mafia documentary. Welcome to this episode of Bigfoot territory. An important message at first. With this documentary, we are trying to raise awareness for the gruesome history of the Highway of Tears. We are not trying to be disrespectful. Condolences to the victims of the Highway of Tears and their families. We are aware of the fact that many people will find it outlandish to assume that Bigfoot is involved in the murder and disappearance of at least many dozens, maybe hundreds, of natives and other people along Canada's Highway 16. And we will also look into the other possible explanations, like serial killers or even something more sinister. So, let's start with the story of the Highway of Tears. Canada's Highway 16, a desolate stretch of road winding through the wilderness of northern British Columbia, has long been shrouded in darkness and tragedy. Stretching over 400 miles or 700 kilometers, Highway 16 connects the cities of Prince George in the east and Prince Rupert at the Pacific coast. This remote highway has gained notoriety for the shockingly high number of unsolved murders and disappearances over the last 6 decades. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police has been investigating cases related to Highway 16 since the late 1960s. Yet, investigators still grapple with the chilling mystery, yielding no results. The countless cases of murdered or missing individuals along Highway 16, ominously dubbed the Highway of Tears by the natives, remain as grim testaments to the unsolved mysteries and the darkness that haunts some parts of the Canadian North. While official sources mainly focus on over 40 disappeared women and girls, most of whom are of Native heritage, some sources indicate that the number exceeds 80 disappeared or missing persons since the 1970s. These sources also include boys and men, not just women and girls. The region surrounding Highway 16 mainly consists of vast forests and mountains, and has been home to all sorts of ghost stories since ancient times. Since the early 20th century, Westerners have reported stories of eerie lights in the forest or strange figures standing next to the road, staring at cars at night. Native legends of Zunukwa or Kushtaka, examples of the many Bigfoot-like creatures in native legends and folklore, have been passed down through many generations in the region. The area is inhabited by various tribes. Today, they mostly live in remote and isolated villages. Over 20 native communities border the highway, with most of them being unconnected to the outside world. Not even public buses service most of the native communities and villages in northern British Columbia. Highway 16, cutting like a lonely artery through the landscape, is often the only connection for these small communities to the rest of the world. The road is surrounded by hundreds of square miles of empty and vast forests and wilderness. In October 1969, 27-year-old Gloria Moody from the Bella Coola Indian Reserve vanished along Highway 16 while on a weekend road trip with her family. A day later, hunters discovered her body on a cattle trail approximately 6 miles west of Williams Lake. She had been brutally beaten to death. This marked the first case officially listed in the Highway of Tears serial killings, a series that continues to this day. In the years following the 1969 murder, many more bodies were discovered along the remote highway, often those of Native American women and young girls. Finally, in fall of 2005, after dozens of bodies were found, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police formed Project E-Pana, named for the goddess that the Inuit people of Canada believe cares for souls before they go to heaven or are reincarnated. The task force was initially formed to investigate the killings of 3 15-year-old Native girls in 1994, whose cases were possibly linked to a serial killer. After only a few weeks, Project E-Pana began to expand the investigation into cases that reached back to the 1960s and 70s. While Project E-Pana has been the highest-profile police investigation involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, it only addresses a tiny fraction of the problem, as official police documents list only 18 Native women as missing. But various Native groups, tribal leaders, and multiple public organizations such as Canada's Women's Support Service list at least 43 Native women and girls as missing. But still, the list only comprises women and girls. Elders from some tribal communities and various private investigators argue that the number of victims is much larger and includes boys, men, and in some cases, entire families. Various organizations and institutions have accused the British Columbia Police of deliberately ignoring the problem and impeding investigations. Native leaders contend that authorities mostly engage in rhetoric rather than concrete efforts to apprehend perpetrators, and that investigations often lead nowhere as soon as law enforcement and various levels of government become involved. A major public scandal occurred in October 2015, known as the British Columbia Government Email Scandal, as executives of the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure searched the ministry's records for any files related to the Highway of Tears and missing women. Subsequently, they deleted all files and overrode all backups that permitted the IT system to retrieve the deleted files. Certainly not the only case of cover-ups by the police and the government of British Columbia. The serial killings continue to this day. In 2020 alone, 4 bodies were discovered in the area around Vanderhoof, at the eastern stretch of the highway. Additionally, the most recent officially listed case in the series occurred also near the town of Vanderhoof, where Chelsea Amanda Quah disappeared in October 2023. Quah was a member of the Stony Creek First Nation and was last seen at her residence on October 11, 2023. Her disappearance was preceded by the disappearance of another tribe member, J. Preston Raphael. Quah's remains were found on November 7, 2023, in a wooded area on the tribe's territory. The natives of the region have countless ancient legends describing some of the territories that now lie along Highway 16 as taboo or sacred places, often because they are inhabited by Sasquatch-like beings such as the Kushtaka or the Zunukwa. In many of these native tales, these beings are depicted as malicious and evil, known for stealing women or children and hunting humans. It is said that these creatures often attempt to lure women into the forests by imitating the cries of babies or small children. Nearly every tribe or native group in the region knows stories of tall, giant-like cannibals who inhabit the vast and remote wilderness. These stories have been passed down for hundreds, if not thousands, of years by the native peoples. Many of them believe that the serial killings, now known as the Highway of Tears series, are actually a tragic aspect of the existence of these communities since many generations. But of course, the Highway of Tears, like the entire Canadian North and Alaska, is also the trolling ground for dropouts, criminals, and serial killers. The history of the Pacific Northwest, in general, features some of the most notorious serial killers ever, such as Ted Bundy, the Green River Killer, or Bob Hansen, the Flying Nightmare. Some of these individuals have turned into real killing machines, preying on the weak and helpless, with kill counts exceeding 100 victims. Additionally, the fact that most of the native villages are not connected to the outside world and young people are forced to hitchhike makes them easy targets for serial killers on the hunt. However, even official records list the first case on the Highway of Tears in 1969 and the last case in 2023, which makes the ordinary explanation of one or multiple killers highly unlikely and points to larger structural or institutional problems. It is also unlikely that no sort of cover-up within several institutions is at work. Another grim and shocking example of institutional violence against the natives in Canada would be the so-called Starlight Tours. The Starlight Tours, also known as the Saskatoon Freezing Deaths, are a series of murders in Saskatoon that occurred from at least 1976 to 2018. First Nation members were murdered by members of the Saskatoon Police Department, who would arrest them for alleged drunkenness, disorderly behavior, or sometimes without cause. The officers would then drive them to the outskirts of the city at night during winter and abandon them, leaving them stranded in temperatures around minus 18.6 Fahrenheit or minus 30 degrees Celsius. This practice is known as taking Indigenous people on Starlight Tours and continued for at least 30 years in Saskatoon, persisting to this day. Multiple cover-ups, attempts at censorship, and failed internal investigations within the Saskatoon Police Department have occurred since the early 2000s. No police officer has ever been sentenced for murder. So, cover-ups, corruption, and censorship still seem to be the rule when it comes to the murder of Indigenous people in Canada. For sure, with so many unanswered questions surrounding the missing or murdered people of Highway 16, many people start to believe that something more sinister than a serial killer is responsible. Another huge problem in the 23 First Nation communities bordering the Highway of Tears, which complicates the investigations, is the desolate situation that most of the communities are in. The rural region is plagued by poverty, drug abuse, domestic violence, and disconnection from traditional culture. Also, many of the families are disrupted by the foster care system and the Canadian Indian residential school system. The remoteness of the region and the fact that most of the Indigenous communities have no access to adequate transportation still force many of the natives to hitchhike along the highway. There is no bus service available between most of the communities and other cities, and hitchhiking is often the only way for many to travel vast distances in this remote and lonely wilderness that feels as if it has been lost in time. And while other circumstances also contributed to the disappearances, the significant part of the officially listed victims at Highway 16 were indeed last seen or reported to be hitchhiking before their disappearances, which makes them an easy target for any sort of attacker. Another eerie observation noted by various Bigfoot and cryptid researchers is the similarity between some of the cases on the Highway of Tears and the missing 411 phenomena. The missing 411 phenomena, named after a series of books by U.S. author David Paulides, describes cases of missing persons who have vanished without a trace, mostly in remote wilderness areas. Some researchers argue that the cases on the Highway of Tears and the missing 411 phenomena are likely related and may have the same perpetrators. The truth is, when it comes to the dark and murderous story of the Highway of Tears, no one knows how many people are missing or since when people have been disappearing along the highway, or who or how many perpetrators are responsible. Only one thing is certain: mystery and shadows loom large over this desolate landscape. Let us hope that one day justice will be served for those lost to the endless depths of the wilderness. And of course, whatever the so-called skeptics might say, many dozens of alleged Bigfoot videos, photos, or audio clips were recorded in British Columbia in the last few decades. And although the northern parts of British Columbia are sparsely populated, some of them were recorded directly in the region around Highway 16.
Absolute fuck is it?
What's your opinion on the murderous events at Canada's Highway 16? Have you heard of similar stories in other regions? Let me know in the comments. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed this episode of Bigfoot Territory. Subscribe to the Squatch Mafia channel at YouTube for more videos on Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Check out Squatch Mafia at Patreon and TikTok for extra content. Thank you for watching.